decent, you know?
Kind of
like it's just gotten so out of control here.
Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. The Chicago teachers' strike enters its second weekend, but could the end finally be in sight?
What do we want? A fair contract! When do we want it? Now!
Striking teachers and support staff cap off day 7 of the strike with a rally in Grant Park and a march down Michigan Avenue. But both sides say there are encouraging signs that the contract dispute could be resolved this weekend. Meanwhile, Democratic presidential candidate Senator Elizabeth Warren stops by to rally with the picketers.
We didn't solve our $838 million budget gap with a large property tax increase in 2020.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot unveils an $11.6 billion budget that relies on some new revenue and a lot of vague terms like improved fiscal management to close an $838 million budget gap. Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson faces heat from police union for refusing to attend a chief of police event keynoted by President Trump. And in sports.
Ross flies one into center, sends Davis back at the wall, and it is gone!
The Cubs turn to World Series catcher and clubhouse favorite David Ross to replace Joe Madden as manager, while the Bears try to find some signs of life after a disastrous loss against the Saints.
Joining us are Greg Pratt of the Chicago Tribune, Laura Washington, columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times and contributor to ABC7, Kate Grossman, education editor for WBEZ, and Kevin Fishbane, Bears reporter for The Athletic. All right, guys, let's dig into the top story of the week, the teacher strike. Kate Grossman, is there light at the end of the tunnel where kids might be back in class on Wednesday?
Well, we all hope so. Last night was very encouraging, really, for the first time. The teachers union came out and they were excited and enthusiastic, and they said, we're really hoping to come back on Monday. Now, of course, they came out this evening and they were much more muted, and they said they're down to the last few issues, but it's tough, and this is where the rubber meets the road.
What are those issues?
I mean, it's always been about class size, putting hard caps on class size and putting money behind allowing that to happen, that you can have firm class sizes and staffing increases.
And has the CPS actually put that in writing, that they're going to have caps on class sizes and social workers and nurses in every school, and they're going to be held to that?
Well, they have been very resistant to doing the caps on class sizes. I don't know where they are at this exact moment. They have said they're committed in writing to hiring more nurses and social workers, a nurse and a social worker in every school. But of course, the details really matter. And as they've said, the union wants some enforcement mechanisms, because it's not enough to just say you're going to do it. But if you don't, they want to be able to grieve and say, you promised a social worker in every school, let's do it.
Laura Washington, you think the two sides can iron this out this weekend?
It doesn't look likely. I mean, they may be able to get to the point where they have a settlement, but I don't think it's going to probably be enough time to get the kids back in school, because we know the CTU is a very democratic organization, and they spend a lot of time working with their members, and they take everything back to their members. So even if they came to an agreement tomorrow, by the time they got that ratified and ready to go, we're into Monday.
There's a lot of steps that they have to take just to get back into the classroom. Greg Pratt, the teachers union wants 3 years for their contract. The CPS has put 5 years on the table. Who's going to win that battle?
That's a really hard one because they're both entrenched on that. They both want it. The teachers union wants it badly because it's a lot more pressure on the mayor if it's coming up on an election year. The mayor doesn't want it in an election year or right before an election. So that's a really hard one.
But you don't hear the teachers union protesting about that one. They're protesting about the class sizes and stuff. So is this issue at the forefront like those others are?
Well, only they would know if that's the hill they're willing to die on. But that is a lot less palatable to the public. You know, hey, we want to be able to strike before an election versus afterwards. So that's not going to be something they talk about. The public understands class sizes. They understand staffing. You can't make an argument to the public of we're going on strike because we need to be able to exert more pressure politically.
But that's an out for the union, actually, because if they don't get what they really want, they'll demand a 3-year deal because they're going to be refused to lock into a 5-year deal.
So there's leverage that they can use there.
Right.
Kevin Fishbane, what about student athletes that want to compete in a game this weekend or make the playoffs? What's their status right now?
Yeah, well, right before we went on air, the IHSA, there was a judge because a bunch of cross-country kids, their parents, filed they wanted a restraining order to allow their kids to participate in the state meet, and the answer was no. Football, they need 3 days of practice, so that needs to be done. They have to be in school by Tuesday or Wednesday so they can play next weekend. Obviously there's a lot of people angry on all sides, but there's nothing like an angry sports parent. So you would wonder if there's anything that can get people going. But obviously that is just another small size of this. But you've talked to the Simeon football players. They're the one CPS team that actually has a chance in the state playoffs. A lot of those kids are looking for college scholarships. They're not able to play right now.
And so they can still qualify for the playoffs according to the IHSA if they're able to play next weekend, right?
Yeah, so the playoffs will start next weekend, and as long as they get 3 practice days in. So the IHSA would not budge on that. They said, we'll let you in because they've only played 7 games, but 1 game fell through, and then obviously they can't play this weekend. They said, we'll let you get in the playoffs, but you still need those 3 practice days if you actually want to participate.
Kate Grossman, do you get the sense that CTU is in a way enjoying its time in the limelight? It had Senator Elizabeth Warren here picketing with them. Joe Biden apparently called them this week as well.
Well, sure. I mean, we've all seen every single day this week. They've had mass rallies. They've called in Elizabeth Warren. They are milking this for everything they got. They are incredibly well organized. They are out there beating the drum. They tried to shut down Lakeshore Drive today. I mean, they are relentless in this, and so they're in the vanguard of this national movement, but this sort of what's called bargaining for the common good, to try to not just be about wages, but to be about dealing with the social conditions in the schools and that the kids bring, and they want this limelight, and they're trying to take it for whatever they can get.
And Laura Washington, there's an editorial board at the Chicago Tribune that said over and over that they believe this is about CTU exerting political power, saying we might have supported Toni Preckwinkle for mayor. She might have not done very well, but we're still a force to be reckoned with.
What a surprise. They're an organization, they're one of the biggest organizations in the city. They represent one of the largest populations in terms of working populations in the city. Of course they want to have political power and they want to exert it. They want to try to show who's boss. I think that in some ways the mayor made a miscalculation. I think back to what Kate said about working conditions in the classroom and social justice issues, CTU forever, at least since the days of Karen Lewis, has always been about those kinds of issues. And I think she thought that she gave them the 16% increase up front, gave them all the money they wanted, the salary they wanted, that would not only satisfy them, but would satisfy her PR needs in terms of looking as though she were really going all the ways that she could. But she forgot about the bigger role that they have in terms of social justice and classroom amenities and making sure that the kids got what they wanted. And that's been their ace in the hole in terms of the argument they've been making ever since.
And Mayor Lightfoot campaigned on those very things. Greg Pratt, has her favorability in the community taken a hit at all because of this?
Well, that's something to watch, certainly. It's interesting. There was a poll recently, and it sounds like people support the union generally because this is a union town, and people say if the union thinks it's going to strike, it's going to strike. But people also weren't blaming the mayor at that time in that poll because people say, well, she believes in these things too, and things are complicated. What it becomes...
And they might blame her predecessor too.
Sure.
She still gets that honeymoon period.
I mean, she's not even 6 months in yet. So there's something to be said for that, but if it keeps going on and what it means long term is a real interesting question.
Kevin Fishbane, labor contracts in the NFL or MLB can get kind of tenuous too. Where does this sort of compare to those kinds of issues?
Well, the teachers are much better organized than I think.
Yeah, you don't see the players marching down Michigan Avenue.
Exactly, and obviously there's a lot more politics involved. I will say the one thing that's interesting is you wonder. Obviously, there's so much time that both sides are putting in, but I know, having covered a lockout for the NFL, they would just be there overnight. I mean, they wouldn't go back home. They would just be there overnight, and then eventually they'd have a press conference, and they'd do it again, and they'd go overnight into the hours. And again, not to say that these two sides aren't putting everything they can into this, but you kind of wonder why. Just keep going. Don't leave the bargaining table until you get some really substantive progress.
One of the things that the mayor's people are saying is that time has been a big issue because of the democratic way that the teachers union negotiates. They had to bring it back to this, what is it, a 40-member bargaining team,
right.
And they have to go over every single line and every single proposal, and then they have to come to some kind of consensus. That takes a lot more time than just a one-on-one negotiation or with the two bosses in the room.
All right, Kate Grossman, final word on this issue. What's your message to parents who are worried about what they're going to do next week?
I mean, hold on, it will end. There is no doubt. And remember, in 1987, it was a 19-day strike. So this is nothing.
It's not unprecedented. All right, let's move on to some other city news this week. The mayor announces her $11.6 billion budget plan and closes an $838 million budget gap with some creative accounting terms. The proposal involves new rideshare fees for solo and downtown trips, and it doubles investments in city mental health services. But critics want some of the shuttered clinics reopened. Greg Pratt, looking through this plan, big chunks of money here attributed to things like zero-based budgeting and improved fiscal management. Do you have any idea what exactly that means?
Well, they're buzzwords. I know that's what that means. It's interesting because there's a lot in this budget that is not clear. There's a lot of things that are sort of optimistic. There's an ambulance thing where they're going to get $163 million to get reimbursed
from who?
From the state through the federal government. And
that was money they weren't getting in previous years?
No, they were charging something like $900, and when they were getting $900 when they were charging $2,500, and they want to get more money, and they think that they will. But if that doesn't come through, and if the state legislature doesn't give them a real estate transfer tax increase, they're potentially in trouble.
And does that mean she has to go to the well and raise property taxes if the legislature doesn't come through on that?
Well, that was her message in her budget address. I mean, she made a big deal out of saying that there wasn't going to be a big property tax, just this little $18 million that's going to go to libraries. But she also said that if I don't get what I need from Springfield, and if I don't, I'm going to have to go back and raise taxes. And we don't have a lot of time. We have a veto session. She's going to get what she needs. She's got to get it. She's got to get it over the next 6 days of the veto session.
Plus a casino, plus pension reform.
She hasn't been getting a very warm reception from Springfield so far.
Kate Grossman, what about the tax on rideshare, Uber and Lyft? Do you think that's going to stand, or will those companies successfully lobby to get rid of that?
Well, they're pretty powerful, but there is a strong argument, I think, that the public can agree with, that there's too much congestion on downtown, and that's what she's really been trying to push, that this is a way to ease that. So there's a really strong constituency for that. Though I do think this issue with Springfield, I mean, they don't even have any language yet. You don't see any of the leaders picking up on this. Mm-hmm. She doesn't really have a lot of allies in Springfield.
Well, and legislators will say, I'd like to know what I'm voting on before I can tell you whether I would vote yes or no.
What a concept. Huh?
Yeah.
She didn't, it was interesting on the rideshare. She didn't make it easier on herself because she threw out some really strong words against them. Mm-hmm. She said that
the free ride is over, or the free reign?
She said their free reign is over, and that if they actually cared about equity, they would pay their drivers more. And that was pretty fascinating.
Kevin Fishbane, will you avoid the loop if you know you have to pay a higher rideshare fee just to get back and forth?
You know, as a millennial, I sometimes ignore like the extra tax that's thrown into some of these things. So I probably would still do it just for the ease. I mean, that's why these two companies, all these rideshare companies, are so successful. So I do wonder if she's kind of taking advantage of the fact that they're going to push back. But I do think a lot of people who take rideshare often are still going to do it.
It's not an unpopular tax.
And it's still probably going to be cheaper than a lot of cab rides, and it's still going to be easier.
I think she's also trying to look at equity in the sense that further out in the city, outside the downtown area, she's not going to raise those fees as much. And in fact, for shared rides, she's going to reduce the fees for that. And that's because studies show that most of the folks, especially in areas like the South and West Side, where the need is really greatest, that's where the real action on shared rides is. So it'll be better for certain communities. But I also wonder how it's going to help or hurt the drivers, because it's got to be. I mean, they're going to take a hit on their income as well.
Greg Pratt, there's a handful of aldermen, we know who they are, who have sort of opposed Mayor Lightfoot at every turn, hoping more of their colleagues would join their cause, and they were hoping maybe the budget would be the time where the wheels came off. Do you sense that that's going to happen throughout this process?
Probably not. So the thing that, one of the surprises from this is that there's no property tax increase for the main budget. There's a tiny one for the libraries. It was supposed to be an apocalyptic budget. It was supposed to have hundreds of millions in property taxes and be this big problem. So if this is the budget that goes through, as much as people will complain, and they will complain about a variety of things, how are you going to get 26 aldermen to vote no on something that has no property tax
it's not a heavy lift, but when you talk about $838 million budget gap, and 100 and some odd million is going to be saved with zero-based budgeting and improved fiscal management, does that tell you that sort of these numbers can kind of be fudged within some range?
Oh yeah, the budget, you know, you can forecast different things, you can play with your budget. Actually, the city departments and all budget departments are known for that, where you say, oh, it's going to be this because you're trying to get something else, you're trying to get something cut, you're trying to get more money somewhere. Heaven forbid that a political agency do some game playing with its numbers, but it has been known to happen.
I'm shocked. Kate Grossman, part of this budget is also an increased investment in mental health treatment, although it's getting pushback because she doesn't want to reopen the clinics that Emmanuel closed. So what do you think her thinking is with this investment?
Well, the idea is she wants to put more money in the existing clinics to support the people who are primarily in low-income neighborhoods and draw in more young people who need services. You know, a lot of folks who've been upset for years about the closing of these clinics are, of course, very disappointed and feel betrayed because they thought she was going to do this. A couple of the aldermen and the advocacy groups. Now the question is, as Greg just said, are the aldermen going to vote down a budget, that has no property tax or a nominal property tax increase over this mental health issue? I don't think they probably will, but they're mad about it. And this is sort of part of this mantra that's going out there, that her progressive credentials are really in question, that she promised all these things during the campaign, and now when she's really in office, she's not delivering.
And certainly the Chicago Teachers Union wants to make that case too. All right, let's move on to some law enforcement news this week. The Fraternal Order of Police issues a no confidence vote in Superintendent Eddie Johnson after Johnson announces he'll skip President Trump's speech to police chiefs on Monday. Already under fire, local ministers grill Johnson on his reaction to the Laquan McDonald video, and the police department vows big changes after a federal judge finds that the stop and frisk program still disproportionately targets men of color. Laura Washington, is Superintendent Johnson's job safe right now?
I would say it's teetering, especially because of the incident that happened with when he was driving home from the restaurant the other day, which is under investigation. I don't think that Lori Lightfoot's going to fault him for not speaking to the police chiefs, because I think she would agree with his rationale, which is that he believes that Trump does not respect our values, that he's used a lot of racial and anti-immigrant rhetoric. But there's been so many questions about so many things in his tenure. I frankly just think that she's trying to hang on until she gets past some of these other crises, gets past the budget, gets past the strike. She doesn't probably have a really strong candidate right now and waiting in the wings, but he's going to go sooner rather than later.
And part of it, doesn't Superintendent Johnson have to hang on for a bit to qualify for the largest amount of pension that he could
get? To get fully vested.
Greg Pratt, you had a little bit of a scuffle with the police spokesperson at City Council this Wednesday. What was that all about?
I think that it was probably a reflection on the pressure that they're under. So Eddie Johnson arrived at the budget and he got asked by reporters to talk about what's going on, what happened that night when he was found asleep in his car at 12:30 after admitting that he'd had a couple drinks. And a bunch of reporters spoke to him, and he said, "I can't talk about it, guys." He was very polite. One of his spokesmen was really mad at the media for asking him questions. He said it was disrespectful, and I said, "Of course that's not disrespectful. That's our job."
Mad at the media for doing their job.
It's again been known to happen, but it's a reflection of Eddie Johnson's tenure really is in trouble. And what he has going for him is that there is a lot of respect that the mayor has for him for stepping into the breach, as she put it in front of the editorial board, where when Laquan McDonald tape came out and they had to replace Gary McCarthy, he stepped into a really tough situation and has done a tough job. But the question she has to deal with and the question she's struggling with is he the guy who is going to fix the department in the long term?
And they tout improved crime numbers. I mean, is that enough to keep him around a little longer? And what about his standing? We saw that he had appeared with some ministers in the community. What about his standing with that crowd?
There was a question that came up about, in terms of the Laquan McDonald case, and there was an accusation that he actually was part of a discussion in a meeting that signed off on, when they saw the video and signed off and said it was okay. And he denies that, and he talked about this in the meeting he had with the ministers, and I think many of those folks came away satisfied that I think that people in the community see him as an advocate for not only for African Americans in the community, but also an advocate for the cops and for police community relations. And and he's been really supportive of the consent decree and really argued that this is something, the training is really an important part of that. So I think the community is still behind him.
All right, there's also this agreement with the ACLU to dramatically reform how they do stop and frisk. The judge is saying it still disproportionately targets men of color. Is there really any way to reform this where it's going to be constitutional, these so-called street stops?
Good question. There's been a federal magistrate that's been overseeing this for the last several years, and the number of stops have gone down. That's the good news, but the vast majority of them still remain African Americans, and that's something that if they don't get that fixed, they're going to be back in court over with the ACLU.
All right, let's move on to some sports. World Series catcher David Ross takes the helm as manager of the Chicago Cubs. The Bears try to salvage their season after demoralizing blowout loss to the Saints, and the Bulls and Blackhawks plod along at the beginning of their seasons. Kevin Fishbane first with David Ross. What do you think he brings to the Cubs as a manager, and can he fix what was wrong last year?
Well, I think there's a certain clubhouse culture situation that they believe David Ross is going to be perfect for. He's got that balance of, obviously he's friends with a lot of the players, so that's going to be interesting to see how he maneuvers that, but he holds guys accountable. Anthony Rizzo's talked about in 2015, you know, David Ross got on him one time after a game, so that's going to be important, but really this is Theo Epstein and Jed Hoyer. This is putting their guy in place. So many of the things that happen within a game are decided before the game, from analytics and all those things. So, you know, they're kind of hoping that he can just kind of be the face of this team and help with the clubhouse, because they're going to make so many decisions kind of on their own.
So are they just kind of lording over the manager, and is that typical in a major league franchise right now?
Well, I think Theo has maybe more power and more cachet than a lot of people in his position in Major League Baseball, so he has a little bit more to that, and obviously
he got the two franchises with the biggest sort of World Series droughts to
exactly
win.
And there was a disconnect between him and Joe Madden, and things just weren't working anymore. And they believe someone like David Ross, they can have more synergy there. But certainly Theo needs to look in the mirror too, because Joe Madden will be the first to say a lot of the problems they had were because they didn't have the right players in place in certain, especially in the bullpen the last couple of years. So I think that we've seen around other baseball teams bringing in a guy with no managerial experience, and it's worked. So they're obviously hoping that David Ross can be their example.
Was he their first choice? I mean, this Espada guy from Houston was really highly touted. He apparently got a second interview, but he probably would have cost more. So is there any indication that the Ricketts are trying to save money here?
I wouldn't go that far. I think David Ross was probably the first choice from the day he retired. I imagine that they had an idea that he would eventually be in this position. I think Espada probably in a vacuum might have been, in terms of his experience and some of the qualities, might have been a better choice. But for what the Cubs need, for what the Cubs want, and frankly for what the Cubs probably were always going to do, it seemed all signs pointing to David Ross.
We've got two other Cub fans on this panel, right? Kate, am I Am I skipping you?
You're skipping.
I'm a White Sox fan.
You're a White Sox. Okay, so we
That's
got one other.
slander.
Are you excited about the hire?
I'm excited about anything that can make the Cubs win. I have my concerns about the lack of experience, but I think that Theo Epstein, he's gambling the rest of his career on this pick. If it fails, he's out. He's not going to get a second or third chance.
All right. Well, another guy who might not get a second or third chance is Mitch Trubisky if he doesn't start playing better. Do you sense that he can make a leap and start being an average quarterback, given how bad he's looked this year?
Yeah, well, I think that's got to be the goal right now, because the Bears' internal goal was that he could be an elite quarterback, and he's gone becoming extremely below average. I mean, he's probably one of the worst 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the entire NFL. So maybe it starts there. It's set their bar lower, ask him to do less, simplify things, trust other options in your offense, and hope that he can just manage a game. That's not the way they would love it to be, but that's just kind of where we are at this point.
What are his biggest issues right now?
Well, footwork has still been an issue. It was an issue when he came into the league, and they haven't fixed it. You know, we saw it a little bit last week, where when the rush is coming, he just gets skittish, and his footwork comes off, his eyes come up, and he makes a poor throw. The one thing that's been interesting is, as bad as he's been this year, he actually has not thrown that many interceptions.
Right.
So he's got that going.
Although there's a few that could have been interceptions.
100%. There have been many of those. But I think footwork is, and he just still struggles to read defenses and understand how to go through his progressions and attack defenses the way that Matt Nagy wants to. It's a very complicated offense, and I think he's shown that he's just not up to leading that offense at a high level.
Obviously, Ryan Pace, the general manager, and Nagy, the head coach, have a lot invested in this because he was the second pick, and they traded up to get him. Do you think they still believe that he can be what they thought he could be?
They probably are forcing themselves to, because they don't have another option right now, and they're really not going to have another option for a long time. They have to try to make this work and figure out different ways to. But I think you're right, though. He is not going to be anything that they expected, especially even just a month or two ago. They had high sets.
Well, the hype before the opening game, as we were talking about before, was huge. And what a letdown.
One thing Mitch did this past summer was he kind of was okay with being the face of the franchise, the face of the city. He started doing commercials that we never seen him do. He was talking to everybody. He was doing promo shoots outside.
He was on the cover
field.
of Chicago Magazine.
Exactly.
Saying we're back.
It was the summer of Mitch, and then when the fall of Mitch came, he just couldn't handle it.
It makes you wonder if he was working as hard as he should have on the actual game.
Well, apparently he's got a good work ethic. It's just not happening in the game.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that they're starting to learn, because I said before the season, I said if Mitch Trubisky takes a step back, it's probably just because he never was that guy. Right. Because he is generally considered a hard worker. He's one of those. They tell you he's usually the first one at Hallis Hall each morning, but they can't figure out why that's not translating to the game. I mean, he had a bad throw on an easy play on third down that he said he hit that throw every single day in practice. Wow. And the game happened, his footwork went off, and he missed it. And they can't figure out what's going on there.
All right, well, you guys have been a great panel, but we're out of time. So for Greg Pratt, Laura Washington, Kate Grossman, Kevin Fishman, my many thanks, and we'll see you on the next edition of the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. We skipped over the Bulls and Blackhawks. Is there anything we really need to know in general about their seasons, other than if either makes the playoffs, it would be a nice accomplishment?
It would be fun, because this kid Kobe White looks like he's going to be a blast to watch, and they played an exciting game in their first game. Right. Then you realize they lost to like a really bad team.
But they scored a lot.
Yeah, so they might be exciting.
And what about the Blackhawks?
Hockey's funny. All you got to do is get the eighth. You just got to get into the playoffs.
Right.
They still have the goal. They still have Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves, so I'm not going to doubt them too much. But they're still kind of near the bottom.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices. Robert Clifford is the honoree of this year's Illinois Bar Foundation's annual fundraising event that raises money to enhance the availability of justice for those without attorneys throughout the state.